Live wealthier in terms of experience and of sharing and of exposure to new countries and new places and new cultures. That's what today's travel story is all about. I want to catch up with an adventurer who recently completed a 43,000 kilometre road trip that ended right here in Cape Town. His name is Nikos Leontis, and although he was born and raised in America, his cultural heritage through his mother is from the island of Cyprus, which he has actually called home since 2016. So what made him leave America and move to Cyprus, and then leave Cyprus at the age of 39 and set off on a Yamaha scooter in search of adventure? We're going to find out as we welcome Nikos on the line. He's joining us via Zoom this afternoon, having already left Cape Town. I'm sorry we didn't get to do this in person, Nikos, but welcome to the show.
No worries. Thank you. Hopefully you can hear me all right.
Yeah, we're hearing you loud and clear.
Not too good here. So
okay.
Great. Good. Well, thanks for having me today. It's a shame I'm not there in person, but maybe when I get back, we can do something else as well. But
sounds like a good
appreciate
plan.
You guys having me today.
Thank you so much for making time to chat to us. Nikos, born and raised in America initially, but did you always feel a strong sense of being tied culturally to Cyprus?
Yes. So most of our family is from Cyprus, and we spend all our summers there and traveling back and forth. So we had a deep-rooted heritage there as well. And, in America, everything is kind of a mixed pot anyway. So people struggle to find identities where they can. So it's nice to have a little bit of heritage when you're growing up in the US. So.
Yeah. What made you decide to move to Cyprus in 2016? Was it about exploring your roots, to being with family, or just needing a change of perspective?
Well, actually, I have South Africa to blame a little bit for my travels, because up until around 2015, I had never done any traveling really, other than going to Cyprus and Greece and maybe to Canada or something like that. I had done the same thing every year my whole life. But then I have a friend that lives here in Cape Town, and he actually invited me to his wedding. And we were a big group, an international group of about 30, 40 people. And like I said, up until then, every year, the same thing in Cyprus. And then I came to South Africa, which is completely different to anything I've ever done. And I said, well, what have I been doing this whole time, my whole life, just going to the same place every year, which is beautiful. I love Cyprus. I love our island. But I see something completely different. And then I have to blame you guys because of that trip, then I couldn't stop traveling. And I went all over Asia, Europe, and South America, and all kinds of places. And so ever since visiting Cape Town in 2015, I've just continued traveling.
I love it.
Kind of caught the bug from coming here. Wow.
Well, I'm sorry for the sickness we gave you, but it's a very nice one to suffer from, although it's a very expensive one to suffer from, I know. Nikos, okay, so you start traveling and you go exploring the world all over the place, but when did you start playing with the idea of the kind of trip you've just finished, of getting on a motorcycle and driving the entire length of Africa? And not just that, you did a whole section of Southern Europe first before you headed into Africa. Yeah. Where did that take root?
So growing up in the States, everybody drives cars there. There's some people drive motorbikes in maybe the more warm climates and just for the summer, but it's not like a primary way of transportation. So I was barely interested in cars, let alone motorbikes, most of my life. But one of my trips to Southeast Asia, specifically Vietnam, they have more scooters and motorbikes than people. So that's kind of the culture there. And starting traveling, a big trip people do is usually either from the north or the south to the opposite direction, and they'll buy a scooter for maybe a few €100, and then they'll sell it and then continue on their travels. So that's where that kind of started for me. It gives you kind of a sense of freedom, maybe in a different way than like a car or a vehicle can, because you're more light, you're more compact, and you can just go wherever you want and freely. So that kind of started, and I did a lot of trips all over Southeast Asia with my motorbikes there. I must have bought like 4 or 5 different ones. And then originally my plan was to ride from Asia to Europe, but then COVID happened, and that was very difficult to do. And there was a lot of civil unrest in a lot of the countries where I was trying to pass. So I kind of scrapped that whole plan, and I decided later I'll do it the other direction. And so originally I was going to ride all the way to India from Cyprus, but things didn't work out as well as I planned, and the timing. I didn't want to get stuck through Turkey and Iran in the winter. So I decided, you know what, I've got a lot of friends in South Africa. I'll do that direction instead.
Okay.
But I didn't realize what a big commitment that would be, because, you know, the continent of Africa is very big and it's very massive, very, very diverse. And it's not easy like Southeast Asia or Europe. It's not a very easy trip. There's a lot of people who do it, but I didn't realize what I was signing up to, which is maybe a good thing, because I might have not done it if I knew how challenging it would have been. Yeah.
Just for anybody
that's basically how I got started. Yeah.
Okay. Just for anyone who's coming in midway to this conversation, Nikos Leontis speaking to us. Sorry, I think I gave you an extra syllable at the beginning there, but it's Nikos Leontis who recently finished a 43,000 kilometre motorbike ride. He started in Cyprus. He made his way through a few parts of Europe first, but then traversed the entire length of the continent of Africa, ending up in Cape Town just a couple of weeks ago. And okay, so let's talk about the how you managed to do this, Nikos, because it's one thing to have the dream and have the courage to undertake the unknown and set off on the open road, but it costs money to travel. Visas cost money. You've got to pay for accommodation and food along the way. You've got to pay for petrol or diesel or whatever it is that goes into the bike along the way. And you are doing this while not going into an office working, earning a salary every day. I know that the nature of your work does help in this case, but tell us a little bit of how you were actually able to fund a trip like this.
Well, I would be lying if I said everything was easy, but I do have some savings, which helps, that I rely on. But okay. I try to be as simple, as basic as I can. Traveling really doesn't have to be expensive if you don't want it to be. So the way I travel, which maybe a lot of people wouldn't like, is very basic, and I also volunteer. So a lot of my expenses are covered, such as accommodation and meals and things, because I go very slow, and I visit schools, I visit farms, and I visit all kinds of associations as well. So that cuts a big expense out. But even with that, you know, Africa was probably more expensive than some trips I've done in Europe.
Really? Oh dear, the Zoom line just wobbling a little bit there. I hope we can get Nikos back again. Apologies. Let me just recap while we try and reestablish that connection. Sorry, Nikos, we're struggling to hear you on this side. I'm going to put you back to my producer to see if we can just maybe drop and restart the Zoom line, which might be the best option here. And while we do that in the background, let me just recap for anybody who's come in midway. Our guest, Nikos, has just completed a 43,000 kilometre motorbike ride across the length of Africa. In fact, he left Cyprus, he travelled through Greece, through some of the former Yugoslav countries, across France to Spain and Portugal, and then made his way down through Morocco into Africa and down down the rest of the continent, ending up here in South Africa and specifically in Cape Town just a couple of weeks ago. And as he's been explaining to us in the background, part of what made that possible was his commitment to the idea of volunteering. If you've ever heard of the concept of the platform Workaway, which encourages people to travel and work at the same time, and for example, you can visit and stay on a farm, and part of your commitment is to do some hours of labor on the farm in exchange for your accommodation. That's the kind of concept that Nikos applied to this trip, and it got into all kinds of unusual volunteering opportunities. Nikos, before we talk about the challenges along the way, share with us a couple of examples of the jobs. When I looked at the list of things you had done as part of the volunteering on this trip, it ranged from, as you said, visiting schools, helping out on farms, helping out at wedding receptions. Tell us a bit more about some of the most memorable jobs you did.
Yeah, so through Europe, probably one of the most memorable was in Italy, in the north of Italy. We went to, it was the 17th century villa where there was a count living there. He inherited it through his family, and he basically turned the whole place, it was like a mansion, into a wedding venue. So every weekend in the summer, he would have all kinds of international weddings, and we were like a team of 3 or 4, and we would just help anything you can imagine, anything needed to be done or prepared for the events. And then there was other ones such as farms, yoga retreats, all kinds of everything you can imagine, really. Yeah. And then in Africa, it did get a little bit more difficult because sometimes the concept is a little bit foreign, you know, and it starts to become a little financial. So the more and more south I was going, the more difficult it would get to find something that same kind of concept. In Morocco, I did a lot of nice ones. In the Gambia, in Senegal, even in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, it was amazing. I mostly was at schools, but then sometimes it gets a little bit of a financial aspect where you're because some of these places are very impoverished and the funds are not so readily available as in Europe. And so sometimes there gets an expectation of financial exchange, which kind of defeats the purpose. So towards the end of West Africa, I did a little bit less, and I was just more focusing to get here. And then when you get to Namibia and South Africa, the concept starts to exist again.
Okay.
And there's a lot of options here, even in South Africa, and projects you can join and all kinds of things. But yeah, in parts of West Africa, specifically like Cameroon, Congo, it kind of just disappears. And it's also a challenging places to travel as well. So. That's mostly how I travel, yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about some of those challenges. I mean, you just said a few minutes ago that it's probably a good thing you didn't know what you were getting yourself in for because you might not have left. What were some of the biggest challenges you faced along the way?
The number one thing that would have stopped me from even leaving Europe, I probably would have turned around if I knew it is the visas alone. Now, for South Africans, I think it's much easier for you guys to travel through Africa with the visas and things. But of course, abroad is difficult for you guys. So I kind of got a feeling of what you guys feel like in the other direction. Yeah. So I think all in total, from leaving Morocco until here's like the first free visa I've gotten the whole trip. The rest I had to pay every country. And it was probably more than 2,000 euros in visas alone. And if someone told me the minute I left Morocco, you're going to pay 2,000 euros just to cross the land, I probably would have turned away. But I'm glad I didn't research that part because it was worth it in the end. It was slow travel, so it kind of wasn't one big bill all at once. But
what about mechanical breakdowns? I mean, Keith asking, did you know much? Did you do any training on how to fix the bike before you left? And did you have any issues along the way?
So I learned a lot on the road. So like I was telling you, I learned to ride in Vietnam and Thailand. And that's there. They have more motorbikes than people. They have more mechanics than you guys have coffee shops and wineries, So you don't need to know anything. You just need to know how to ride. And in Asia, you're okay. But here is a different situation. Here, I think if I had a little bit more mechanical inclined knowledge, I would have been a lot better. Unfortunately, I learned a lot on the road, what I need, how the bike. I learned every single part from all the problems I had. And my bike specifically, I think you guys sell it here, but there was maybe just 2 or 3 countries in the whole trip that actually had this model. So it was very hard to get service because people didn't understand it. And sometimes they don't have parts available. I would get people to help me bring parts from Europe or from Asia. And that was the most difficult and probably most expensive part, just because also the roads are so different than anything you guys have here and anything we have in Europe or Asia. So it's a real challenge. I think any vehicle, and there's hundreds and hundreds of people doing this kind of trip every year from any vehicle you can imagine, from Toyotas to Land Cruisers to motorbikes to even bicycles. And I didn't meet a single person. I must have met at least 100 people all doing overland trips, and I didn't meet a single person who didn't have a breakdown. So West Africa is a challenge. So it doesn't matter what vehicle you have, you will have issues. But I don't want to pretend I did this all by myself. There's a lot of people out there, YouTubers and bloggers or whatever, but we have a big community, actually, overland community, and we all support each other. We share information, and so many people have brought me parts. I'm kind of infamous in our little community of all my breakdowns and everything. And so many people have brought me a new clutch, brought me all kinds of parts and things. And we help each other. So there's no way I could have done this alone. And I really want to give them their props because this community, we all network. And there's another group on Facebook for West Africa travelers as well. And we all share information and help each other on the road. And it's really, this is the trip that you can't do on your own. You need help. You need a community. You need people,
What about the communities you moved through along the way? Nikos, when you look back on the experience, any highlights for us? Any particular places where you were received with such warmth that it really touched you, or conversely, where you had a terrible experience?
I really keep reinforcing the idea of there's not a place in the world you can go, you don't fall in love with something. So every country I went, Africans in general have a very warm spirit and welcoming, and people have been very hospitable. Probably one of my highlights was in the Gambia, because the first border crossing I had was in Senegal, and that it was a kind of an infamous border for a lot of corruption and difficulties. But then you get into the country and the people are actually beautiful. So I never like to hold people accountable for how their border is, because borders can be quite difficult. I think they're separate from the country. But it was a very challenging border. It took me about 6 hours to cross. And I was with another rider as well. And they wanted a lot of money and things. And at that point, I thought, maybe I'm not cut out for this trip. Maybe Africa is a little bit too challenging for me. Maybe I'll turn around. But then I ended up in the Gambia. I was volunteering at a farm there. And it was a local woman. She had a farm. She had a lot of initiatives, nature conservation, all this kind of thing. She had a women's football team that she managed. And she had just decided to open up a guest house. So she was on Booking, and her first guest was a young man from the Czech Republic, and he stayed 2 nights, and then he ended up staying 2 months. And that's when I arrived, and he had no money, he had no passport. The guy was about 25, 26, and he was in a wheelchair as well. So his story, this could take like 2 hours to tell it all, but basically his story was quite complicated. And he was there, and they didn't have any heart to throw him out, which he was stuck in the country, it turned out, for like 2 years. So anyways, to make it a short story, between me and her, and also her neighbor, which was a pastor from Nigeria, we tried to find a solution, and we made a lot of videos online about his story and everything. We ended up raising over 2,000 euros to get him a ticket to go home, also get a new passport, and as well compensate the woman, because she had fed him and sheltered him for 2 months without any payment or anything in return. So it was a very positive story, and it was interesting because, the woman, she's a Muslim woman. The neighbor, he was a pastor, and me, a Greek Cypriot. We were all different religions, all different ethnicities and everything. I think the boy, even, he was Jewish. So we were all different people. We were working together just to solve a problem. And it was a beautiful thing. And that's what really motivated me to keep continuing the trip. And it was funny timing, because that was actually the point where I was like, wow, Africa is different.
Oh dear, the Zoom line seems to be dropping on us again. But look, I mean, Nikos, what amazing story.
I had barely even started. So it was
I'm so sorry. We just lost the Zoom line again there, and I'm also looking at the clock ticking away from us. So I'm going to have to wrap the interview there with profound regret that we don't have another hour to listen to Nikos, because we've only got as far as the Gambia, and we still have to cover all the round, all the way through to Cape Town to finish the trip many months later. If you want to read up more about his experience, you are Googling, if you just Google Nikos 43,000 kilometers Cyprus, you'll easily find some of the media articles about his trip, or find your way to his own Facebook page, where he has covered much of the adventure, where you can see some of the photographs and read up a little bit more about the stories of the people he met along the way. Nikos, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show today, and I'm sorry that we haven't been able to have you on for longer to hear more of the adventures on the road, but thanks for whetting our appetite for the road as you've done, and we wish you all the best for your onward journey from here. It's been a huge pleasure to have you on the show this afternoon. Nikos Leontis speaking to us about his trip all the way from Cyprus to Cape Town.